Hello, and welcome to All Our Little Messes, a podcast focused on healing through intentional conversations about parenting, relationships, religion, and more. I am your host, Veronica Winrod, and I'm so happy to have you here, listening in on my thoughts today. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome back to All Our Little Messes. This is episode 5, and today I have a guest for you guys that I'm really excited about. Been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks. Her name is Danika Norman, and she has a lot of really great insights for this episode that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about building a village and like how difficult it is in today's society. So, Danika, why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Cool. So, my name is Danika. I'm a mom of 3. I basically started my business, Victory Mamas, and it was built around this concept of needing a village as a new mom. And I had found myself in a new community with a lot of fear at the time of what was going on in our country and COVID and everything like that. And I really wanted fellow moms to help me figure out how to navigate early motherhood in light of everything that was going on. And, I just had a lot of fears around like, oh my gosh, my kids, they need people, they need friends. Like, how do I create that for them? And so, I started my mom's group, which eventually evolved into a business. And otherwise, my background is just in marketing, and that has definitely helped me along the way. And I come from a family of four girls. And you'd think that with that came a really strong village background, but actually I don't think that was true in my case. It's really interesting. So that's part of my story.
Okay.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, nice.
I'm from the general North Idaho, Pacific Northwest area. And yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and it's really interesting that you mentioned that you came from a family with a lot of daughters, because like I also had that experience where I came from a family that I'm the oldest of 14, and there's 8 girls in there, and there's not that I don't have that sense of community either, which I think is like such a big contrast to what life used to be like. Where we had these generational villages where everybody knew everybody was related. We even lived in generational homes. You look at early civilization, like native cultures and things like that, or even reading the Bible, the Old Testament, where they talk about that. And it's very different from like how society is structured now, where we're almost encouraged to figure it out alone.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of pressure put on us. There's this crazy story that I heard through my husband's grandma, and she's one of my favorite people, who has definitely become part of my village, in after marriage and in motherhood. And I can't remember the exact specifics, but basically she was an ordained minister in an evangelical church. And this story had been around since the 70s or something like that. And one of the ministers, back when there was some kind of mission work being done, they went to somewhere in South America where it was tribal. And this missionary fell in love with one of the village girls. And they got married, and then eventually, they lived there for a little bit, and then eventually they came back up to the United States to raise their firstborn child. And this is around the 60s or 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And the native South American woman eventually just one day left. And it wasn't
Oh,
like your typical divorce situation,
right.
but she was just like, this is not how it's supposed to be. She felt so isolated. She could not understand how American women were living, as mothers.
Right.
And I just think that's such a powerful story, however much truth is to it, however much folklore is there, but it rings true, because I've lived that, and I know
Mm-hmm.
what she's talking about. I know that side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's so true, even primitive cultures know that it needs to be a community effort, that it needs to be,
Exactly.
it's like some of the earliest knowledge we have, and it's lost, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like even ingrained down into our biology. Like we're not wired to be alone ever. And we
No.
start to have like major psychological problems when we are alone. And
Mm-hmm.
like you can see that in society. Like women are isolated and alone, and there's been like this huge rise in like postpartum depression and things like that. And like I feel like I haven't actually looked into this, but I feel like if we start tracing it back, then we can actually see like where it started to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and
Yeah,
like
probably.
even when, even early mothers, and I've noticed this, like my experience giving birth in hospitals, like they don't send you home with resources. They don't send you home even asking if you have a support system. I was
Mm-hmm.
never asked if I had a support system when I
Mm-hmm.
left the hospital. They would
Yeah.
ask me, "Hey, is your car seat? Do you have a car seat?" And that was it. That was it. Here's your first appointment, your pediatrician appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was sent home, and I was basically expected to just figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
this 23-year-old new mom with no idea what she's doing, but I'm expected to figure it out without any help.
Yeah.
And it didn't used to
Mm-hmm.
be like that. Like everyone used to just take care of each other's children, and it was like an expected thing, and it was like considered an honor.
Well, so much of it is tied to, in my opinion, it's just once we started to give away our innate knowledge and our
Mhm.
innate power in ourselves of knowing our health and
Mhm.
knowing our educating our kids,
Right.
like once we started to shift that power away to the quote unquote experts, that's a huge part of this puzzle where um you know the lack of support started to happen. It's like, okay,
Right.
we give away our power and our community power over to the experts, and it's just this top down model,
Right.
rather
Right.
than this nice communal level playing field and generational playing, like more terraced, right, rather than
Right.
just a vertical line.
Mhm.
um that, because that's how it should be. There should be elders, and there
Right.
should be current, like your own mother, not necessarily your grandma, but your own mother who can
Right.
walk alongside you. Yeah, I've heard of so many moms having that similar experience, and it varies hospital to hospital, caretaker to caretaker, and
Right.
it's
Right.
getting better in some places, but that's not an uncommon experience that women have, where they're just um yeah,
Yeah.
so underrepresented, so not supported, and it's really, really heartbreaking for me.
Well, and it goes beyond not being supported. Like because you're so isolated and because you don't have that support system, if something pops up during, early motherhood, you have no knowledge to fall back on. And so if you have a health problem or your baby has a health problem, like you honestly do feel attacked.
Yeah.
Like I experienced that. Like for the first month after I had my first baby, I never left my house. I didn't leave the
Mhm.
house. And when I finally did, it was to go to the doctor. And we were in and out of the doctor's office every week for the first 3 months. And I was really struggling with breastfeeding and just with like general infant care. Like I had this tiny little person that I was expected to take care of. And, being the oldest of 14, you would think I would have lots of experience with that. But there's a huge difference between babysitting your siblings and actually raising your own. And like nothing had prepared me for that. And I had no support.
Yeah.
And so like when we started having like health problems and stuff with the baby, like it was a very isolating experience. I felt attacked because I had even the people that I thought were there to support me, like his caregivers, were the ones that were actively like attacking me and calling me a bad mother and stuff. And so like it was horrible. It was very isolating. And so they've like society, especially in the US, and I was talking to my husband about this the other day, and I've noticed it is a problem that is kind of just in the US. So you look at how society is structured in Europe and even places like Canada, and their healthcare system and family law is very much centered around support and community for mothers. Even down to things like paid time off. If you're a working mom, there's places in Canada where you get up to a year of paid time off, and that's actually written into labor law. Here,
it's that's a tough one, because like so this is a great point for us to go off of. Like, where do we think, like, we can talk all day long about how horrible it is, but it's like, okay, well, where does the solution come from? And in my opinion, I don't think it should come from the state. Because once it's written into laws like that, then it has to be supported with funding, and then that's requiring taxpayers to financially support you, in your decisions as a mother. And I don't agree with that. But I do think it does need to be more part of our culture. And it has been taken away out of our culture, like I said, for so long, and given to the experts. And, like, I feel for my own mom, who the way she birthed versus how I chose to have my children, which was by home birth.
Right.
Thankfully, with her presence and support there during laboring for all three of my kids.
Oh, nice.
But she had 4 daughters. All 3 of them were natural deliveries, not all of them by choice that way. Like, some of them just arrived too soon, alone in a hospital room, without my dad necessarily present at all of them.
Wow.
Definitely not like a super useful presence, I don't think. And just a nurse up until the moment the baby is literally coming out, some random nurse in a cold, hospital room, and with no pain help. And I just shudder at the thought of that.
That's so unnatural.
So what her experience was like that compared to what my experience was, I mean, to her, that's huge. That's a huge leap, and it's a huge positive leap. But still, for me in postpartum, I had a similar experience as you, where, granted, it was like 2020 and I felt like the world was ending, and it was all that crazy, just very hard as a new mom to be, having your first child and not knowing what you're doing. And then all of a sudden the world is shutting down.
And you can't.
Which is a whole other aspect, right? But knowing, that, my mom watched me care for my kid for like a week and a half. Then she was like, okay, you got it. And that first like week and a half was really good. And it was really a beautiful time for me to have with my first kid. And my mom was there trying to help me a little bit, but she was like, oh, you're a natural, you've got it. And then by month 2, the anxiety started to set in, where you are just
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know what I'm doing, and that the sleep is not as easy. And so then you're, in a spiral, sleepless, like it just really starts to compound.
Right.
Um, the lack of sleep and the anxiety about it all and not knowing what you're doing and the frantic Googling. And this is when
Oh,
this is when I'm still, trusting the experts and
the
Googling
experts,
everything under the sun.
they had me using an app to track his feedings,
Yes.
his diapers. Like,
Oh,
it
everything.
was horrible. I was setting so many timers and Googling so many
Yes.
things and
Same.
pumping and the formula, and like
Yes. And
I
that's
was
how I
doing
failed at
all of it.
breastfeeding.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
like, it was funny because once I stopped all that and like I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to
Hmm.
trust the child to tell me when he's hungry instead of just
Yep.
putting him on a timer and force feeding him.
Yeah.
It was so amazing how quickly that anxiety went away. Once I was just
Same.
like, screw it all. He will tell me when he's hungry. He will tell me when he's tired. I'm not going to wake him up to feed him because,
Yeah.
his
It's
tummy
such a
will
huge
growl.
step. It's such a huge step for a mom to take to realize I
Yeah.
know how to be a mother.
Yeah.
I know how to be
Yeah.
a mother. It's built in me. It was God given.
Mhm.
God, the
Yep.
Lord gave me this strength and
Yep.
this knowledge, and I just need to tune out everything and listen. And so, on one hand, you can say, uh, I need all this support, but the more information I took in, the more overwhelmed I became. And so
Mhm.
I really needed to stop and just tune into myself and tune into my own mothering instincts. And
Yeah.
my own mothering instincts were far superior than anything I was reading.
Yeah.
But it also was so enriched by now my experience of having like a solid village to mother within.
Mhm.
And there's so many questions that I have answered in such a better way than frantic Googling in the middle of the night. Um,
Yeah.
and so many moms that I am connected to that know so much and have given me resources that I would not have been able to necessarily figure out on my own intuition. But
Yeah.
that's a very important first step is like first silence the noise.
Mhm.
Get into your heart and your body as a mother because without it, motherhood is going to be such a struggle. It's going to
Yeah.
be you're going to be fighting your earthly desires. You're going to be thinking you deserve this or that. You're going to be 10 times more anxious, I guarantee you, until you just like step into your mother skin. Is like kind of like
The
how
mother
I
skin.
like
I
to
like
think about
that.
it. Like you
Step
just
into
like,
your mother skin.
yeah,
Yeah, I like that. No,
you just
and
embody it.
yeah, and I mean, and like I think that one of the first steps too with that would be like if you don't have a family unit either, because like a common problem with a lot of new moms is like we're spread all over the globe. Like when I
Mhm,
gave birth, my family was down in Oregon and I was
mhm,
up in Alaska. So there was
mhm. That's so far
1,500.
away.
Yeah, and like I was not native to the area I'd moved to. And when I got married, I kind of grew into myself a little bit, and then it got worse when I got pregnant. And so like I hadn't actively worked at building a support system outside of my family. And so
Mm,
I didn't have any I didn't have anything. I had no
mhm,
support. I had no one I could call up and say, "Hey,
mhm,
what is this? What is happening? Why is he doing this? Why won't he stop crying?" So yeah, Google was my option. I
mhm.
Googled. And so
Yep.
yeah, like stepping away from Dr. Google and just trusting myself and trusting my baby was just it was a huge first step.
Mhm,
Huge first
mhm.
step. But
Some
uh
moms don't even get there,
yeah.
unfortunately in our modern culture. Like there's some new moms that I know that not new moms, but some fellow moms that I've known and you can tell. when they haven't done that, because
Yeah.
you can still sense that they're disassociated from
Mhm.
motherhood, and you can sense that they're a little uncomfortable with their children, and
Well, and
you can
like
sense that they're lacking their mother instinct. They're not stepping into it, you know?
and like I think the part of that problem too is that we as a society, especially in the US, have taken children out of society. We have tried to remove
Mhm.
children out of society instead of building our society around children and recognizing the fact that they are the future of this world. And so we have to
100%.
build our society around them. We're
Mhm.
expecting these children, these little people who have no concept of the world around them outside of themselves, to build their life around society. And
Mhm.
so that's also like we've removed children from society, and so they've become like very clinical.
Yeah, and they're an
Everything's very
afterthought.
they're an afterthought. And so and they're seen as a problem, which is why I mean
Mhm.
all of these these I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this one, but all of the doctor visits that you have to
Mhm.
continuously bring them to, and just the act of giving birth itself is so medicalized these days because
Mhm.
giving birth and having children is seen as like a clinical problem that has to be fixed.
Yeah, it's a
And
medical
yeah,
condition.
yeah. Yeah, and they're not
It's a
they're not
medical condition,
something they're not something that has to be revered and taken care of. And
which is
so
so, so heartbreaking, because the experience that I had going through home birth for each one of my babies, every single
mhm,
birth was different. Every
right.
single birth added something to me as a mother,
Mhm.
and it is an incredible transformative experience that every single woman who has a normal pregnancy, which is the majority of pregnancies,
Right.
can have this experience and have that ability to get a leg up to step into their motherhood.
Mhm.
And it's just um, medicalized, and it's just, yeah, sterilized. And so you don't
Yeah.
get to have that same type of experience. And instead, you have so many moms who have birth trauma in our country, which is a whole other
Yeah.
conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Birth trauma is huge, and then the postpartum issues are huge. And and instead of having this like amazing transformative experience, connection to God, I mean, literally the veil is the thinnest it will ever be as a human,
Yep.
is so
Yeah.
thin during the birthing experience, if you birth naturally and
As God
with
intended.
support as
Yeah.
God intended, um, in the hands of good midwives, or however you choose to do it. But
Mhm.
the connection to God, and the connection to purpose, and the connection to becoming a mother, to stepping from maiden to mother, it's so important and so awesome to have that experience. And it breaks my heart how many women are even like scared out of it, and believe
Well,
that
they're
it's so
robbed.
dangerous.
They're
And
robbed of that, but that
they
that
are
belief and
robbed.
that understanding, like,
Hmm.
because, from the very first moment you step into an OB office, everything is very it's all medical. The blood draws,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
tests, and all
Hmm.
this fear mongering. Oh, if we don't test you for this, then you can't do
Yes,
this when you give birth. And
100%.
that's a whole other conversation, because
I know, I could talk about that stuff forever.
you work for me, dude.
Yeah.
So don't tell me what I can't do. But yeah, so that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so like from the moment you step into an OB office, it's and like I disclaimer here, I still go to a midwife. I go to a midwife who works in an OB office.
Hmm.
But she's amazing. She's just so chill. It was so different going to her
Mm.
versus going to my first OB. My first OB was
Mhm.
just it was like he was performing surgery.
Yeah,
He
because they are surgeons.
was yeah, he was so cold and detached, and afterwards, like
Obstetrics is surgery, and
yeah,
that's that's where the origins of our modern hospitalized birthing experience comes from, is because they are trained surgeons. Obstetrics is surgery, and that's how are that's how they're like standardizing childbirth, is by more and more C-sections. Our C-section rate in this country is inordinary. It's so high for a Western developed country. And why? Because our model is off of profit. It's a business. And
we even have things like planned C-section. I've actually talked to moms who had a planned C-section, and when I asked them, I was like, why did you do C-section? And they're like, oh, I just didn't want to go through the trauma of giving birth.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
it's really sad.
Oh my gosh, what did he say to you? What did your doctor say to you?
Right? But not even what did your doctor say to you, but for some of these women, it's what did your mother say to you?
What did your mother say to you? Yes.
Because honestly, some of it comes from that, where their experience, the previous generation was so traumatic and was so formed at that point, that they're like, oh no, honey, you don't want to go through birth. You just schedule a C-section, cut out that baby, get it done. It's clean. It's, you have nothing to worry about. And they are robbed of a huge human experience.
I mean, when I was young, I had a very deep fear of childbirth, but I was lucky enough to actually attend a couple of my siblings' births when I was a teenager, and then I also started training to be a doula when I was a 17 or 18 years old. I can't remember. And so through my training, I had to go to multiple births and like assist as a assistant doula essentially. And so during that process, like I actually got to see what birth really was. And even though like I was at a couple births that ended up, there was a couple emergent situations, it still like showed me what it was. Like it was the miracle of life. Like I remember the first time I ever saw a child being born, I just broke down in tears because this was just not at all like Hollywood. Hollywood. You watch a movie of, in a show, somebody's giving birth and there's like screaming and crying and everybody's running around frantically. It's an emergency, right? And like what I was seeing happening was nothing like an emergency. It was like this natural, as natural as breathing kind of thing. She literally just breathed the baby out. And it was like from that point on, I was like, huh. I mean, obviously there will be pain involved, but it's not the kind of pain that people think is so psychologically damaging that you have to, cut into yourself and take the baby out that way. Cause it's just.
Oh yeah. Well, and pain is a whole other conversation because pain will be intensified if you're in an environment where your body shuts down because it doesn't feel safe.
Yeah. Once you go into that fight or flight mode, like everything becomes, that part of your body.
That's why labor stalling and all the interventions that happen in hospital, that's why it's a thing. Obviously that's a whole other conversation, but it's sad. It breaks my heart. Birth trauma is a real problem. And I try to spread the word as much as I can of like the glories of home birth and midwifery care, if you can at least do that. And
postpartum doulas.
Oh, postpartum doulas are amazing.
Doulas. And like I had one woman who while I was training to be a doula, she was like, oh, I don't know if I could be a doula. Like, I don't know if I could be there and like, be responsible if something went wrong. And I'm like, well, there's other types of doulas. And there's like this huge need for postpartum doulas because women don't have a village. They don't have a support system. So a lot of times the postpartum doula that you hire is your village and is your support system during the first couple of weeks after giving birth. And so like that is a huge mission that, I think a woman would definitely be blessed to take because there's definitely a huge need for that.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because my own mom trained as a postpartum doula.
Oh, that's
and was
awesome.
Planning to put it to use for all of her daughters having their kids. But she really did not step into that when it came time
Oh,
to actually do it, at least for me. And I think
oh,
part of that for her comes from a place of um, like difficulty
mm-hmm.
seeing how different my experience is versus how hers probably was, you know. We haven't really talked about that a lot, you
Just
know. And so
facing
I just,
the
it's just
differences.
about giving her grace and her experience versus my experience. And yeah, I'd love it to look a little different, but I also consider myself lucky for how much support I have compared to some women out there that I know, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just not ingrained in our culture. We're not the third world where it's still a part of their, you know, entire
yeah,
structure, societal structure.
yeah,
It's so far
yeah,
gone, unfortunately. But it
yeah.
is kind of like coming around again, you know.
And yeah,
So
that was thing because like the first time I ever heard the whole "it takes a village" phrase, I was just like, oh, Hillary Clinton was the first thing that popped into my head, and then I think I was probably like 14 or 15, and my dad had repeated it, and he's a very politically minded person, and so like Hillary Clinton said it, and so I was just like, ah. So, and like he was talking about how she wants the government to raise our children and everything else, and I never questioned it. I never looked into it, and then a couple years ago, I was like, huh, I wonder what like it really is, because I was like. Raising like taking a village, because I'd run into like social media influencers or whatever who were talking about their village,
mhm,
and so I started looking into it, and it's like it's not letting other people raise your kids. You're still
mhm,
their parent. You're still raising your own children. You're just building a support system, and like you said in the beginning of the show, it's building a village so that your kids can have one as well,
mhm,
so that your kids can have friends and your kids can have a support system as they grow up, and so that your daughters can have that
mhm,
support system and that village. It's like a multi-generational thing that it it really needs to be rebuilt in our society,
mhm.
because
Yeah.
yeah, we have been robbed of that, and it's yeah.
Yep.
um so what advice would you give to people who don't have that support system and don't have that village? Like, how would you tell them to build that village from scratch, ground zero?
Well, I think that like that first step that we talked about
Hmm.
where you got to silence the noise and
Right.
you got to like step into your natural innate motherhood wisdom, and it's there, it's deep ingrained in every single one of us. If
Hmm.
you've birthed a child, it's there, I promise you. And it may take a lot of work to get to,
Hmm.
but it's there. God gave it to you. So, you know, that's really important. It comes from knowing yourself well. It comes from
Hmm.
knowing like what you want out of life well.
Right.
Um, and so you've got to get clear on those things. And so like how I how I continued to figure out how to build my village is I was like, okay, I'm looking for a certain type of woman,
Hmm.
one that is like-minded, right? What am
Right.
I into? I'm into really old-fashioned things, like old-fashioned skills.
Right.
I'm like, I know that I really want to learn how to sew, how to can, how to blah 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 blah.
Hmm.
All the things that grandma used to do that I never learned from my grandma.
Hmm.
um, that's the kind of woman that I'm into. They're probably conservative and or at least you know, appreciate traditional values.
Hmm.
And if I can find that kind of woman around me, then I know that I'll at least have one person, you know, to rely on.
Yeah.
And so I just like put that idea out there. And then I was like, I can probably use social media. And so like some thoughts that were bubbling in my head over several years actually just started to come together. And then one night in a fit of inspiration, I was like, I know the name. and I'm going to put together like all the little brand assets, and I'm going to
Right.
just start an Instagram. So I utilize social media because I was like looking for anything that's out there like that in my community here in
Mm-hmm.
North Idaho, and I was not really finding exactly that. Um, and so I was like, I'm gonna just build it myself, you know. And so it's always an option to start whatever it is you're looking for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, Look and see if it's out there, but if it's not, let that be a kick in the pants to like do something about it for yourself. And
Yeah.
that's the glory of our modern world, right? Like
Right.
we uh, don't have to just rely on this village that was already built around us, that maybe we hate everybody who's there,
Yeah, I see,
you
like, for
know?
a lot of reasons, I kinda hate social media because I feel like it's isolated mothers even further,
Yeah,
but it
there is
can
that.
be an amazing tool to bring people together, and, like,
Yeah.
I've met some people through, the use of things such as, like, just the Peanut app, for instance. I've
Uh-huh.
met some moms through the Peanut app where, like, I have a hard time, like, actually carrying on a conversation and then taking it from the conversation online to an actual
Mm-hmm.
in real life meetup.
Mm-hmm.
But in spite of that, I've actually, used social media and modern technology. And I've actually made a couple of connections, and I'm still, we still talk and we're still friends and we still meet up and our kids are friends. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so no, it's definitely an amazing tool to use.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's how I was able to leverage like a platform, I guess,
Hmm.
for Victory Mamas, for the moms group that I started. Is I was like, you know what? I have a bread recipe that I um that was passed down to me from my mom that I've been making for 10 years. It's
Hmm.
not sourdough, but it's a solid bread recipe that I use in my own family every single week. Um, so I'm going to share this one thing that I have and see what happens. And I just put it out there. Um, I don't even know how people found it.
I don't know. It exploded though.
But I um, the first class that I held,
Hmm.
first meetup, you could call it, first gathering, was 8 women who like trusted me enough to come into my house and learn a bread recipe for me from a perfect stranger on the internet. And I had to trust them too, that I could share my address with them
Right.
and they wouldn't murder my children. Um, and so, yeah, so I did it that way. And I also concurrently was connected through a social media group, the Freedom Keepers,
Mm,
to a different moms group that is larger and just amazing.
right.
I love these moms so much, and we're such a like force. Uh, and so in both cases, social media was my tool to meet all these moms. But the cool thing about Victory Mom is about my mom's group that I started is it started with social media, right? But the
Mm,
priority is to meet in person and
right.
to learn something from someone in the community. So how I structured it is the idea was like, I have these things that I want to learn. There's got to
Mhm.
be someone around me that knows it, and I want to meet them. First of all, I want to talk to them.
Mhm.
And two, like maybe I can learn some things about motherhood while I'm at it, or at least we can like commiserate the difficulties, because at that
Right.
point in my life I was still holding on to a lot of that like woe is me as a mom,
Mm,
and a lot of that like isolation.
right.
um but now that I have such a stronger village around me, I wallow a lot less in that, which is
Yeah.
a cool, I think, byproduct of the positive outcomes of a village. um but yeah, so it's like, if you leverage people around you while you're building it yourself, you're basically calling upon people to step into that. And so, yeah, I was like, okay, so I'm going to start just like you go in class, like, okay, I'll start. I have this recipe. I have this bread recipe. Let me do a class. Then from there, it just snowballed. Someone was like, okay, well, I've been sewing my whole life. It's like, great. I would love to talk to you, and I would love to pick your brain, because I was not raised sewing.
Mm-hmm.
I took one like summer quilting course because my mom threw me into it, and it was not part of our like daily life. We were not brought alongside to learn how it used to be, which was kind of the more, I don't know, past couple centuries in our country type way of doing
it
the
was
village.
just a way of life before modern technology came in and just made everything easier and made us all lazy.
Yeah, and toys,
Yeah.
rather than just like learning how to be a human. Toys were thrown into the mix. So
yeah, we don't need those skills anymore.
Play with this toy because you don't need to learn.
Yeah. That was my 3-year-old or my 4-year-old, for anybody who hears that. This is a parenting family podcast, so you might hear children in the background occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and like it's funny you mentioned, the mental funk that you found yourself into, and how that was kind of lessened after you surrounded yourself by these women and started learning from them and leaning on them when you needed help. Like, mental health is a huge part of like building a successful village and a successful community of women around you. Like, don't be afraid to ask them for help, and because that's the way it should be. We should use them for support, and they should use us for support as well, because we're all in the trenches together. So
yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of that is like taking that step from it being surface level to jumping down into a deeper relationship and building those personal relationships. And that's something that was not ingrained in me as a child. And it's something that I've struggled with my entire adult life, is how to build solid relationships, because I don't know if it was part of my childhood being raised in a small town where things were just like arranged and we didn't really have to like work for anything, or my parents didn't do a great job at teaching me social graces. I don't know what it is that is like broken in me, but it's just always been really hard for me, and it still is. I don't have it all figured out by any means, but yeah, I think it's not necessarily that like I've leaned on these people super hard in like hard times or anything like that, but it's even just like having conversations about this kind of stuff, like how you and I are talking, and being like, wow, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone in my thinking this. You've had that experience too as a mom. Cool. Like, I'm not doing it all wrong,
Yeah.
I haven't completely failed,
and then it goes beyond that too, because like once you realize you have like a common problem, like sometimes you're like, okay, what can we do to fix that common problem? How can we help each other? And that's kind of like the start of the village. That's the start of your village, is like, how can we help each other? So
totally.
Yeah. So before we close, do you have any words of encouragement for anybody who's struggling to build their village?
Oh, yeah, I would just say like, it's not an impossible thing. There was probably a point at which it felt impossible for me. And I was just like, what am I going to do? Right after I moved here, and we were into our new house, and I was overwhelmed, and it's just one day at a time, with any new undertaking. It's just one foot in front of the other. So, start to know yourself well. Like, I don't know how many personality tests I've taken in my life, but I've taken a lot. And I really know myself pretty darn well.
Right.
And I think that's a really important thing to do, is just get to know yourself really well. Then you'll figure out what you're looking for. And
Mm-hmm.
that will like make you be drawn to certain people, and you'll be able to spot them out a lot easier. And then, you may be in a public place where, like, you're at the beach, for instance, here in North Idaho at our lovely lake beaches,
Mm-hmm.
and you see a mom who you're like, she looks like she's very like-minded, like she's into
Yeah.
the same kind of things that we're, and I even met a mom that way, and I struck up a conversation with her, and I was like, hey, and our kids were kind of playing with each other a little bit, and we
Mm-hmm.
got to talking, and, oh, you guys just moved here too, cool. um and then I told her about Victory Mamas, and so she ended up coming to one of my Victory Mamas, and supports it, still. So
Nice.
yeah,
Awesome.
there's just like, get yourself out there, know yourself, and put yourself out there, and
Mm-hmm.
utilize social media, but then, like, get in person, make in-person meetings a priority. Like, stop relying on other people to, like, make the thing happen.
Yeah.
Show up and start meetups, start whatever it is, even with your podcast, Veronica, you could start a local meetup up and say, hey,
Yeah.
if you're a local North Idaho mom and you like my podcast, come, you know, to my monthly meetup, and we'll, like, talk about all this stuff in person. So we have our own support system.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Danika. This has been an amazing conversation to have with you. And I'm hoping we can have something like this again.
Yeah. Sounds
All
good.
right.
Thanks,
All
Veronica.
right. Yep. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Danika on building a village and the struggles surrounding building that village and why we think they exist. I did want to bring up just a couple things and just make a couple points a little bit more clear. So, Danika and I talked a lot today about how the medical industry seems to be designed to isolate women away from their natural village and from elders in their community and stuff. And so I just wanted to clarify a few things about that. Like when we're talking about going to elder women in our community and talking to other mothers for advice instead of the experts, we're talking about childcare. We're talking about breastfeeding, and we're talking about diaper rashes and sleepless nights and things like that. We're not talking about actual medical emergencies. Like if your child is seriously ill, please go to the doctor, and trust your instincts. Like a mother knows when something is wrong with her child, and trust your instincts. So if you know that there's something wrong, please do go to the doctor. Like I am a believer in the balance between natural and modern medicine. Like there is a time and a place for modern medicine, and if your baby is seriously ill, please go to the doctor. The second point I wanted to bring up was Danik and I talked a little bit about society and how it was kind of structured around children being a nuisance. And one of the points I brought up was that the US is one of the only developed countries that does not have a set labor law or family law for paid time off after birth. And Danika brought up a very good point that the government should not be involved, and I just want to say, like, I agree with that 100%. The government should not be involved in that. Like, it should not even. It's a travesty that the government even needs to be involved in these countries. Our culture and our society has completely done away with modeling
society around the family unit. And as a result, we don't honor childbirth and the bond between a mother and a child after birth. And so now we expect mothers to, go back to work 6 weeks after giving birth or a C-section, and we lose out on that, that year after birth, which is absolutely crucial to a child's psychological development. And also, it's absolutely crucial for a mother's mental health as well, because it is very harming and damaging for a mother to leave her child 6 weeks after giving birth. It's unnatural to us. And so the fact that a lot of us feel the need to do that, in order to not lose our jobs, or in order to, make it and pay our bills, is really horrible. And we as a culture need to get back to honoring the bonds between, a child and a mother. And if a mother needs to stay home for, a year after giving birth, she should at least have the assurance that she's going to have a job to go back to. She should at least have that. And I feel like it needs to be more than that. In my mind, it needs to be more than that. There should be a system set in place on the employer's part, without being forced, for the mother to have some sort of, if the household is a 2-income home, they have to have something set in place where the mother can have income. She can have paid time off for as long as, is reasonably necessary after she gives birth. It is absolute tragedy that the government has to step in at all and write it into labor law and basically force employers to honor the postpartum period. It's absolutely ridiculous. And as a culture, we need to move back to, or move forward, actually, I should say, to honoring the bonds between a mother and child. So, that was the two main points I wanted to bring up. So, I'm really excited for you guys to hear next week's episode, and I hope you enjoyed listening to This Week with Danika.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of All Our Little Messes. Please let us know how much you enjoyed it below, and add any questions you have about this episode. Also, don't forget to follow us on Patreon for amazing exclusive perks, including early access to podcast episodes and bonus episodes every month. We've also recently added a support group for all of our paid patrons. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram for daily updates and insights that mirror podcast topics. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.